In the summer of 1995, 18-year-old Lisa Jefferson was a young mother in transition. After ending a relationship with the father of her 2-year-old son, she made the tough call to move from Texas back to her hometown of Syracuse, New York, for a fresh start.
I think it was a lot that I was missing my family. They were everything to me. Then I had my grandmother on the phone saying, come home to grandma so that I can take care of you. And I had to make a decision. It was not an easy thing.
Lisa's grandmother welcomed her and her son Carlos Jr. into her home with open arms.
I'm starting over again, but I'm happy to start over again. I was focused on how I was going to rebuild my life with my son.
But there were plenty of men whose sole focus was on her. And one in particular, Cecil Torrance, a neighbor in Lisa's apartment complex, was determined to make an impression.
Cecil was a very handsome guy. Now, he was tall, he was dark. He was such a charming guy. But I wasn't looking to get into another relationship really fast, and I just wanted to be kind of free.
Cecil just kept wanting to get a date. He would do anything that she wanted to do just to, to grab her attention.
But after several weeks of casual flirting, Lisa finally gave in to Cecil's advances and was pleasantly surprised.
He would always take me out to eat, and we'd have good conversation. He was definitely rough around the edges, and I kind of liked it. Nobody was going to push him around.
Cecil worked in construction and had 2 little girls of his own. Even though they lived with his ex, he seemed to be just as devoted a parent as Lisa. Soon, Cecil and Lisa became more than just friends.
I fell head over heels for him. People knew that was Cecil's girl, and it kind of made me feel important. It all happened really fast. He treated her like a princess.
When Lisa landed a job at a department store, it seemed like life was going her way.
And I started to say, okay, girl, you got the looks, and now you got demand. You can provide for your child, and the confidence definitely started to grow.
And in April of 1996, when Lisa discovered she was pregnant with a boy, she was overjoyed by Cecil's excited reaction to the news.
Cecil said, we're going to be a family. We're going to bring Carlos Jr., and we're going to move in together. We were picking out colors together and just high anticipation of the birth of his first boy.
On Christmas Day of 1996, Lisa and Cecil received a very special delivery, Cecil Jr. Lisa thought she had it all. Unfortunately, her family thought otherwise.
Once she had the baby and they moved in together, I think that's when all the change came. The not going out, the not being around the family, and gotta cook and clean, and everything has to be ran accordingly. I didn't like that at all.
Cecil was a very jealous guy. One time a coworker invited me and a couple other girls to her house for dinner. He called my phone about 50 million times while I was there, arguing with me about something that was so minute. I couldn't understand it, but then it clicked to me. Cecil is very insecure.
So when Lisa got home, she assured Cecil that she only had eyes for him, and that seemed to do the trick.
He's apologizing. He's sorry. I love you. Just stay home with me.
In those moments, Lisa fell in love with her man all over again, despite her family's disapproval.
I loved Cecil. I loved him. I loved our family. I loved the life that we were trying to build. And I wanted the American dream.
In the summer of 1999, Lisa Jefferson and her boyfriend Cecil Torrance were enjoying watching their blended family grow.
We actually moved into a new place. Carlos Jr.'s in school now. And I found a new job at a customer service company. And so everything's going good.
And Cecil's jealous tendencies had all but disappeared. He was quite the doting dad.
Cecil would watch the boys while I was at work. Cecil was an excellent father.
And when Cecil landed a construction job with potential for growth, the young family was on their way.
Cecil was getting paid a lot of money. I'm feeling good about myself. He's feeling good about himself. We're a little power couple. There was just that one piece missing. I wasn't Mrs. Torrance.
So in the summer of 2001, after adding their second baby boy to the blended family, the couple decided it was time to make their union official. In the fall of 2001, Lisa walked down the aisle and into the arms of her adoring Cecil.
It wasn't a big, extravagant wedding, but it was a very beautiful, beautiful day. I was over the moon.
He was happy, she was happy. They looked great together.
Life was good for the newlyweds, until 2 months later when Cecil suddenly lost his job.
Cecil started to change when he got laid off.
But while Cecil struggled to find work, Lisa excelled at her job and was promoted to the HR department of her company.
It definitely gave me a different sense about who I was. I started to really become very confident. I started to recognize that I am very smart, bright, and I can be a very independent woman.
But Lisa started to notice that the better she did, the worse her new husband was doing.
And after applying over and over again at different organizations and getting no feedback, I think it just killed his spirits. And that's when everything started going downhill. He's staying out very late at night, coming in at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, drunk. It started to really, really affect our relationship.
One day in January of 2003, Cecil took his drunken debauchery too far.
Cecil comes home at 5 o'clock in the morning with friends. They're drinking, they're kind of loud. I'm upset. You know, I look at Cecil, I said, what's going on here? What are you doing? And he's like, oh, just go to bed, babe. You know, everything's gonna be fine. They'll be out of here in a little while. I wake up to Cecil passed out drunk and his pager's going off. So I decided that, okay, it must be important. Let me call this person back. I ended up calling the number back and it was a female's voice.
Lisa was furious, and for once, she demanded to know where Cecil had been. And that's when Lisa's husband exploded with a fury she had never seen before.
He grabbed me by my hair and he started punching me in my face. I was scared and I couldn't get away from him. There was nowhere for me to run. There was nowhere for me to hide. And he wouldn't stop. I'm begging him to please stop. You're gonna kill me. He didn't care.
Cecil finally relented and left the room. Lisa quickly called 911. Cecil spent the next 2 days in jail, while Lisa stayed with family, nursing 2 black eyes and a fractured nose.
I couldn't believe it. He came across as a kind person. He didn't give off any indication that he was just a volcano ready to erupt.
Lisa pressed charges, and Cecil was ordered to attend 6 months of counseling. 1 week later, when Lisa returned home to pick up a few necessities, Cecil was waiting and singing a different tune.
He was begging and pleading and crying, and I'm like, no, no, no. Look what you did to me. How could I come back to you?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
He's like, I was drunk and, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I love you. I'm going to counseling now, crying.
Horrified by the violence Cecil had shown, Lisa was prepared to walk away. But the thought of breaking up her family was too painful to bear.
I didn't want to be a single mother. My mom was a single mother. I want my boys to have something I didn't have, which is a father and a mother in the same household.
So Lisa felt compelled to give her family a second chance.
He went to counseling where he learned about empathy, what triggers him to become this way. He did great and everything started to get on the right path.
He showed her he could be the perfect man for her and her kids.
Lisa was happy to put the ugly chapter behind them and plan for the family's future. But Cecil had plans of his own.
The violence certainly escalated, and it led to the worst act that you could imagine.
And before Lisa could see the truth hiding behind his sinister eyes, her world would change forever.
As blood splattering everywhere, I just knew that would be my last time here on Earth.
In the summer of 2005, after her husband Cecil went through counseling for striking her, Lisa Torrance decided to give him one more chance for the sake of their kids.
He was going to be a better husband to me in every way, shape, or form.
And even though Cecil had failed to land a job, it seemed he'd found his true calling at home.
Cecil would clean the house, prepare meals. He would do the boys' homework with them, wash clothes. He was an all-around Mr. Mom.
And Cecil had started making a name for himself as a winning coach on his boys' basketball and football teams.
He took a lot of pride in coaching his kids and the community's kids. People liked Cecil. They wanted their kids to be on Coach Cecil's team.
Life in the Torrance household was better than ever, especially when Lisa was able to buy her family a new home.
She was living the American dream. She was married, she had a family, she had a beautiful home, she had nice cars in a driveway, bank account. Everyone looked at their life as a fairy tale.
And on June 4th, 2007, the family was thrilled to welcome a third son into the world. But what should have been a time for celebration became quite the opposite.
He was still not able to find work, and my career was just blossoming, and Cecil's not happy, arguing with me all the time about where I'm wanting to go, who I'm wanting to go with. His control was at an all-time high.
Lisa had been down this road before with disastrous consequences and was not about to do it again. But she had her family and her future to think about. So in 2008, Lisa went to work on herself.
I started going to the gym. I lost tons of weight. I decided I was going to go back to school to work towards getting my degree. My job is going well. I have my home. The boys are good. Everything is good besides my marriage.
By the summer of 2009, Lisa had found her stride, but Cecil didn't exactly embrace her newfound independence.
He's coming into bars where I told him I was gonna be, and he's making scenes. He's going through all of my social network applications.
That took a toll on her. She just basically got tired of being underneath his thumb.
I was not gonna allow him to control me any longer. I was done.
So on February 28, 2010, Lisa packed up the kids and headed to her friend's house, bracing herself for Cecil's reaction. But surprisingly, a week later, Cecil called and agreed their marriage was over.
Cecil was very calm, and he said to me, I know that we're breaking up. I know that the marriage is done. He just wanted me to bring his children back home for these next couple days so that he could spend time with his boys before he actually had to leave the household. And I agreed to come back.
But Lisa made it very clear to Cecil she was there for the sake of the children, not for him.
When I came back, I was very cold, very withdrawn from him, and we weren't, really talking.
The following morning of March 4th, 2010, Lisa got her oldest boys off to school as usual.
I take my 2-year-old and I sit him on the bed, and I go into the bathroom. I put my cell phone on the counter, I take off my robe, and I get into the shower and I close the glass doors.
But nothing could have prepared Lisa for what would happen next.
Cecil comes in, closes the door behind him, he slides the glass door to the side, and he points a black handgun in my face.
On the morning of March 4th, 2010, Lisa Torrance was begging for her life as her husband Cecil pointed a gun in her face.
I'm scared. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, he's gonna kill me.
Lisa was paralyzed by fear, knowing their 2-year-old son was in the next room.
Cecil pistol whipped me, and he shatters the shower glass doors. blood splattering everywhere.
Cecil pummeled his wife for the next 30 minutes until their toddler knocked on the door.
And he starts saying, "Mommy, Daddy, open the door." So I'm yelling, "Mommy loves you."
Heartbroken and focused on her children, Lisa pleaded with Cecil as a parent.
I said, "What about our kids? If I'm dead, what about our kids? I won't tell the police." And he says to me, "Are you crazy?" Then he shot me. I felt my left femur bone being shattered. And he shot me again. I'm yelling, "Please, oh my God, I'm in so much pain."
Cecil shot his wife 4 times before grabbing her cell phone and fleeing with their 2-year-old son. He had left the mother of his children to die, but Lisa was dead set on staying alive.
I said to myself, if you're gonna die, you're gonna die trying to live. So I managed to crawl out of the tub. I couldn't walk, so my leg was dangling. I crawled down the first flight of stairs. I was in so much pain, so much pain. And then I crawled down the second flight of stairs. At this point in time, I'm in and out of consciousness.
After dragging her mangled body out of the house, Lisa collapsed in her yard. Minutes later, her neighbor discovered her and called 911. With Lisa's life hanging by a thread, word of the horrific early morning attack started to spread.
Next thing I know, my cousin nudges me. He says, "Get up, wake up." And he said, he shot her. Cecil shot Lisa. And I ran out the room, repeating what he said. Cecil shot my sister. Cecil shot my sister. It killed me.
Lisa was rushed to the hospital while police searched for Cecil Torrance and their 2-year-old son.
There was no question they considered Cecil armed and extremely dangerous. There was concern over the safety of the children.
Police canvassed the area and discovered that Cecil had taken his youngest son to his mother's house before going into hiding.
When the police responded to Cecil's mother's house, their 2-year-old son was taken to the youth division of the Syracuse Police Department for safety, just in case Cecil had further contact with the mother.
While police pounded the pavement in search of Cecil, Lisa awoke from her 5-hour surgery to utter chaos.
My family members were coming in and, they had tears in their eyes. And I have detectives in my room. I'm in the hospital under an alias. People are, scared for my children because they're afraid that he might try and come and kidnap them, maybe take them as a hostage.
I was scared. The hospital was on lockdown because they didn't want him to come in and try to finish the job.
After an exhaustive 30-hour manhunt, police received an anonymous tip about Cecil's whereabouts.
Cecil was apprehended at a friend's house. And the police found him hiding under a pile of clothes in a closet.
When I found out Cecil was arrested, I felt relieved. It felt like the boogeyman was gone. And with the help of God, I took everything in me and I fought hard for my life.
After 6 days in the hospital and 4 months in rehabilitation, Lisa made a full recovery. On February 14, 2011, Cecil Torrance pled guilty to second-degree attempted murder and was later sentenced to 18 years in jail.
I was happy. I knew that this was the start of a brand new Lisa, because I was one of the lucky ones. There's a lot of people who don't make it out.
Today, Lisa now recognizes Cecil for the troubled man that he was.
I never viewed myself as a victim because it was happening so far and few in between. No one could have never, ever told me that he would try and take my life from me.
It wasn't her time to go. She was determined to live. He just made her stronger.
Now Lisa volunteers with a local agency dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence.
I try and reach young kids who are going through things like that and get them to understand that, you know what, just because he says he loves you doesn't mean that he won't hurt you.
After being adopted in the early 70s, Amber Dawn Lee experienced an unorthodox childhood. Her parents, once freewheeling hippies, suddenly found religion and joined the Mormon Church, then veered away from the faith, taking young Amber and her sisters with them.
My parents started moving towards the more extreme fundamental groups. They were looking for something that was true to them, for a place to belong. They were really just kind of like cult jumping.
But as Amber's father grew ever more radical, he began having trouble at work.
My dad started having a harder time holding down a job, and he became paranoid. My parents' financial situation started getting worse and worse. Everything became really chaotic.
Finally, the worst happened. The family became homeless.
We lost our house, and something within me knew at that moment that everything in my life was going to change. At that point, we lived in a lot of different places. We lived in the woods in a tent for a while.
They started living out of the car or out of a storage unit, looking for food out of trash cans, not knowing when or where the next meal was coming from.
Amber hated it. She was really upset and, wanted to run away.
I knew something was really wrong. I didn't want to eat out of a dumpster. I didn't want to struggle for survival with my parents anymore. Nothing felt solid and secure.
So in the early 80s, after 2 rootless years, Amber was relieved when her father moved the family to a stable community in Ogden, Utah. It was a polygamous fringe group called the Zion Society. But to Amber, it was the promised land.
The Zionist Society was a new, up-and-coming splinter group in this little small cul-de-sac neighborhood. And everything about the group seemed to be perfect. The children had their hair curled in pretty little dresses.
Every blade of grass was perfectly cut. Every flower was perfectly placed. It really was lush and beautiful.
And for good reason. The shepherd of these pastures was former landscaper turned self-proclaimed prophet, Arvin Shreve.
Arvin looked like a normal person that you would see on the street. Short glasses, just kind of a normal-looking guy, I guess.
Arvin Shreve looked like this kindly grandfather, this little roly-poly old man with a kind, gentle face.
You wanted his attention. You wanted him to like you because he just seemed very contained and in charge. He had a demeanor of knowledge. Everything had order. There was nothing off schedule. It was really comforting that somebody would tell me what I was supposed to do next.
For young Amber, the newfound stability was a dream come true.
If you go from homeless to all of a sudden you're in a house, there's a lot of food to eat, then you're happy. When new families would come in, they would separate the family right away and put each girl or each boy in a council. So I was put into the Arvin Shreve Council, which meant that I was going to be his wife when I came of age.
To prepare for her role, Amber was assigned a mentor, a woman named Sharon Kapp.
Sharon Kapp was the head of one of the sister councils and had a lot of control over a lot of the women and children.
Sharon was one of Arvin's wives. Arvin trusted her. When I was with Sherry, I felt very safe because she's close to the prophet. Sharon taught that it was a really good thing to keep Arvin happy.
And one thing that made the prophet happy was attractive female followers.
We all had to stay really thin and up to the approval of the prophet. The women would weigh in so that they could keep at a certain weight.
But there were other things that began making Amber uneasy. For starters, it had become hard to see her parents.
One afternoon, I started walking around the corner to where my parents were staying, which was 3 houses away. The adults stopped me, like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I'm gonna go say hi to my mom." And they're like, "No, you can't. It's not on your schedule to see your mom today."
But the biggest surprise came when the ladies of Zion introduced a new clothing style to Amber.
I was part of the sewing team, so I would go and spend a few hours every day sewing.
Amber and the other children within these groups, they would be sewing lingerie.
I thought I was just sewing for, sisters or friends. I had no idea that we were doing it as a business. They were actually selling them to the local strippers.
But this was more than just a micro-enterprise. Skimpy garments suddenly turned up in Amber's dresser.
When I opened up my drawer, there were lines of panties. While perfect and frilly, my parents would always teach us about modesty. And then in this group, the panties were lacy with little words like naughty written on them. And it was like, why do we get these grown-up panties as kids?
Still, for an innocent girl who craved nice things, it didn't quite cross the line.
I was a little bit nervous, but I was a little bit excited. Everything matched, and it was really pretty. I was still the little girl that was looking at the lace and the colors, not the strings that were really behind it.
But soon the strings began to pull.
Sherry Cap would dress all of us children in lingerie, me and like a 3-year-old and my other friends who were 12, and they would teach us how to put on lingerie shows.
And the modeling took an unmistakably dark turn.
They would call in Arvin, and we would perform for the prophet. I knew then that something just is not right. I was told not to tell my parents what was going on. It was because they said my parents were not yet at the stage that I was, spiritually, that I had evolved, so I got to learn more.
But Amber's parents did become suspicious, and their attempts to protect their girls would leave a family torn in two.
She had chosen the evil she knew versus the evil she didn't.
And when the compound's front door slammed shut, true darkness descended.
I was beyond tearful. I was just numb. When the alarms went off, it was like all hell broke loose.
In the mid-1980s, young teen Amber Dawn Lee was growing uneasy in the Zion Society. She had just been forced to model racy lingerie for the so-called prophet Arvin Shreve. It didn't seem right, but Amber was too grateful for the stability at Zion to rock the boat.
I wasn't afraid that we weren't going to have dinner. I wasn't afraid that I wouldn't have anything to wear. And I felt protected and taken care of.
She's just always wanted some semblance of a normal life, to have a house and some kind of balance.
So Amber was horrified when she heard her father risk everything one day by arguing with the prophet.
I was in my house when I heard my dad yelling, "You get her out here," and that I was his daughter and that Arvin had no right to keep me there. And I went out the front door, and my dad was in the street, and my younger sisters were in the car. My dad was very suspicious about something going on, and he packed up, like in that moment. Alarms were going off. Men came running from every direction towards my dad, surrounding him, and they were like, "You better get out of here, you better get out of here." It was a really, really scary thing for me. I didn't want my dad hurt.
Amber faced her biggest crossroads.
Basically, at that point, I could have run to the car and say, I'm leaving with my parents, but I didn't want to struggle for survival with my parents anymore.
So she told them to go, and reluctantly they did.
Amber watched as her father drove away.
I was beyond tearful. I was beyond fainting. I was just numb. When I woke up the next day, it was taboo for me to talk about my parents. It was as if they never existed.
Amber had to go on, so she focused on her routine and swallowed her pain. But as Amber buckled down, Zion handed her a new priority.
After my family left, they became more brazen. They started grooming me to become a wife of Arvin Shreve.
Most religious groups prepare young women for family life someday. But at Zion, the lessons began fixating on filth instead of faith.
Sharon was in charge of teaching all of the young girls and the children the SWOL, which was the acronym for the sexual way of life. It was her job, given to her by the prophet and by God, to teach sexuality to everyone else.
And Sharon's teaching methods were a little unorthodox. She and her sisters would entice the children into playing games. But these were no ordinary games.
You'd have this game called Rape in the Dark, where basically instead of truth or dare, it was just dare, where people were told to have some sort of a sexual relationship with somebody that was in the room at the time.
The women in the group were all ages, and you would see a 70-year-old woman holding hands with a 16-year-old girl.
The girls were told to practice things like French kissing with one another.
It's really just extreme sexuality. It became such a part of every single thing within the group that all of a sudden I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin.
Amber tried to keep in mind that Arvin and Sharon knew God's plan.
There were eternal companions for Arvin that were older. Then I thought, well, someday I'm going to, be his favorite wife.
But then someday came a lot sooner than she expected. One by one, Amber's young friends were sent to the prophet.
They would fix them all up and push them out across the street to Arvin's.
Then it was Amber's turn to cross the street.
I was trying to prove myself to them. If I was thrown out at that point, where would I go? My family was already gone. I was on my own.
And Sharon had trained her well.
Arvin was somebody that I loved and feared at the same time. So when it was time going across the street, it was like going down the aisle. I was going from one life into another. And once I crossed that street, then my innocence would be forever gone.
That night, Amber became prey for Zion's man of prayer.
Arvin Shreve raped me, and he hurt me. But I felt like my innocence had already been taken a long time before that actual night happened. The months of training and brainwashing, I think that actually did so much damage. It was almost like I just wanted it to get over with.
But Arvin's rapes continued. Amber tried to distract herself with tasks and routine, but she couldn't escape the hard life she saw stretching out ahead of her.
I'd been raped. I'd been working really hard, and I was not feeling any joy. It was just do what you're supposed to do.
But just a few months later, Amber's life changed dramatically once again.
Somebody came running into the house saying, social services is here, and they're here for you.
It turned out Amber was not forgotten when her parents left Zion.
I don't know how the discussions went down, but somebody told me, you need to pack and go.
Authorities had come to return her to her family. No one knew who had sent them, but Amber was too relieved to ask questions.
I was excited and scared at the same time because I didn't want anybody in the group to think that I wanted to go. And all along hoping that social services actually had the power to take me.
Social services got no resistance from Arvin. Amber was handed over quickly and quietly. But after spending her formative years at Zion, Amber now faced an alien world.
I was caught up in a tornado of darkness.
And as she struggled to find her footing, Zion's walls were about to crumble.
The raid was out of this world.
Nobody had any idea what was really going on.
They thought it was a fortress, but the walls were coming down.
In the mid-1980s, social services had removed Amber Dawn Lee from Zion and from the clutches of so-called prophet Arvin Shreve. No one would ever know who had called authorities, but one thing Amber did know was that she was ready to see her family again, until her hopes were crushed.
I was taken to New Mexico because that was the last known place of where my parents lived, but they were not there anymore.
With no parents to claim her, Amber went into a succession of foster homes as she entered public school.
It was really scary going into high school for the first time. I was not socially normal. I didn't know how to do any of the schoolwork. I didn't know some of the basic things, like really people went to the moon. I was an observer. I would just watch what everybody else was doing and try to fit in. I didn't tell anyone, not one person, where I came from.
The strain of hiding her past and the turmoil of foster care took their toll on Amber. She dropped out of school and hit the skids.
I was stuck in the underworld, really caught up in a tornado of darkness and doing drugs so that I could numb myself from thinking or remembering or anything.
Meanwhile, back in Utah, Ogden police had been watching Arvin and his Zion cult. And Arvin finally made a mistake.
Arvin Shreve brought in a divorced woman and a young child, and the father wanted to make sure that his child was safe. The man hired a private investigator, claimed that she was in the business of buying lingerie. She was able to get this amazing video of these 13-year-old girls to 40-year-old women modeling see-through lingerie.
It was the smoking gun investigators needed.
On August 2nd, 1991, law enforcement raided the Zion Society. They took adults into custody, and then they took the children into foster care.
As Zion crumbled, evidence mounted.
You had people coming forward saying that these children were being groomed to sexually satisfy Arvin Shreve and other adults within the Zion Society.
Investigators found over 750 instances of ritual child sex abuse at Zion. The cult's youngest victim was only 3 years old. With no hope of acquittal, Arvin Shreve and sidekick Sharon Cabb both plea bargained. Each got 20 years in prison.
It's a good thing to know that Arvin Shreve is not able to hurt anyone again, because what he did was absolutely monstrous.
But when the news of Zion's fall reached still struggling Amber, she was stunned.
The raid to me was really something out of this world. I couldn't even believe it. These people that I had been so close to for so long were going to be spending the rest of their lives in prison. It was unreal to me.
But the news was real, and as she absorbed it, Amber saw just how serious Arvin and Sharon's crimes had been. With the help of therapy, she realized how those crimes had
raped me. I have nights when I can't go to sleep, and that's a result of laying next to Arvin, not wanting to move because I don't want him to wake up, not wanting to go to sleep because then I won't be in control. So it never leaves you.
Despite her scars, she married a real husband.
He turned out to be a really stand-up guy. He loved me until
1980, Wiley, Texas, appeared to be exactly what it had always been. a quiet community where families knew one another. Children moved freely between neighbors' homes, and ordinary routines created the comforting illusion that terrible violence belonged somewhere else. No one looking at the town that morning could have imagined that before the day was over, one woman would be dead inside her own home. Another would become the center of a sensational murder investigation, and a seemingly ordinary suburban community would be forced to confront secrets that had been hiding beneath its peaceful surface. Betty Gore was a young mother and wife who lived with her husband, Alan, and their children. To people around her, Betty was not a mysterious figure. She was part of the fabric of everyday life in Wiley, connected to friends, neighbors, church activities, and family responsibilities. Her marriage, like many marriages, had its private difficulties, but from the outside there was little reason to believe that her life was moving toward a violent end. That illusion would collapse inside her home. On that Friday, Betty was alone in the house with her infant daughter. Alan Gore was away on a business trip, leaving Betty to manage the household and care for the children. The ordinary rhythm of the day was still unfolding when another woman arrived. Her name was Candy Montgomery. Candy was also married and had children. She knew the Gore family, and her connection to Alan was not entirely innocent. Before the murder, Candy and Alan had entered into an extramarital relationship. The relationship had eventually ended, but ending it did not erase what had happened. The secret remained part of their shared history, and that history would become crucial when investigators tried to understand why Betty and Candy were together on the day Betty died. The relationship between Candy and Alan had been concealed from Betty, at least for a time. But secrets inside a small community rarely remain invisible forever. People notice changes in behavior. They notice friendships, conversations, absences, and unexplained meetings. The details of the affair would later become central to the prosecution and the defense, because the question was not simply whether Candy had known Alan. She had. The question was whether Betty confronted Candy about the affair immediately before the killing. According to Candy's account, that confrontation happened when she went to the Gore home. What began as an encounter between two women who knew each other would become a deadly confrontation. Candy later told investigators that Betty confronted her about the relationship she had once had with Alan. The conversation, according to Candy, quickly became hostile. Betty was angry, and the confrontation escalated. Then came the moment that would define the entire case. Candy said Betty picked up an axe. From that point forward, Candy's account became a story of fear, physical struggle, and survival. She claimed Betty attacked first, and that she fought back because she believed she was in danger. What happened next was extraordinarily violent. The axe became the weapon that ended Betty Gore's life. Investigators would later find evidence of a brutal attack inside the house. Betty had suffered numerous wounds, creating a crime scene that was difficult to reconcile with the image of two ordinary women from the same quiet community. The violence was so extreme that the central question of the investigation became unavoidable. Was this murder? Or had a confrontation spiraled into an act of self-defense that went catastrophically beyond what anyone could have imagined? For investigators, there was another problem. Candy was not an unknown intruder who had disappeared into the night. She was someone connected to the victim through a complicated personal history. She had a motive that could be understood immediately by anyone who knew about the affair. Yet motive alone could not explain exactly what had happened inside the house. The investigators needed to reconstruct the final moments of Betty Gore's life. They needed to determine who had started the confrontation, what weapons had been present, how the struggle unfolded, and what Candy had been thinking as the attack continued. Candy did not deny causing Betty's death. That fact would become one of the most important aspects of the eventual trial. Instead of claiming that someone else had killed Betty, Candy maintained that the killing occurred during a terrifying struggle in which she believed she was defending herself. Her defense would therefore depend not on denying the physical evidence, but on convincing a jury that her actions were legally justified. But the scene itself raised disturbing questions. If Candy had been fighting only to escape an attack, why had Betty suffered so many wounds? How long had the confrontation lasted? At what point did self-defense become something else? And could a person continue striking an attacker after the immediate danger had passed? Those questions would later dominate the courtroom. For the people of Wiley, however, the horror was more immediate. Betty was dead. Her children had lost their mother. Alan was returning from a trip to a reality that had changed forever. And Candy, the woman connected to Betty through a hidden affair, was suddenly at the center of a murder investigation. The case had all the elements of a story that would grip the public. Marriage, betrayal, jealousy, friendship, violence, and a defendant insisting that she was not a murderer, but a woman who had fought for her life. Yet the truth would depend on what happened during a handful of minutes inside Betty Gore's home. Those minutes could not be replayed. Betty could never tell her side of the story. Candy's account would become the primary explanation for the violence, but it would have to survive the scrutiny of investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and eventually 12 jurors. And as the investigation unfolded, the quiet town of Wiley would discover that the most disturbing mysteries are not always created by strangers. Sometimes they begin between people who already know each other, people who share friends, families, routines, and secrets. On June 13, 1980, two women entered the same story. Only one would walk away from the house alive. And the question of why would follow Candy Montgomery into one of the most controversial trials Texas had seen that year. The story of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore did not begin with the murder. To understand why the case became so difficult to explain, it was necessary to look backward into the lives of two women who appeared to belong to the same ordinary world. Wiley in 1980 was the kind of Texas community where personal relationships could become deeply intertwined. Families attended the same churches, children knew one another, and neighbors often saw each other repeatedly through school, social gatherings, and community activities. Candy Montgomery fit comfortably into that environment. She was married to Pat Montgomery and was raising children. From the outside, there was little about her life that suggested she would eventually become the defendant in a sensational murder trial. Betty Gore was also married and raising a family. She and her husband, Alan, were building a life that looked familiar to those around them. But behind the appearance of stability, their marriage had difficulties, and Alan and Candy eventually crossed a boundary that would have consequences far beyond the end of their relationship. The affair between Candy and Alan was not a permanent relationship. According to the accounts that later emerged, it was planned as something temporary and secret. The two adults attempted to separate their private arrangement from their family lives. Eventually, the relationship ended. For a time, that might have seemed like the end of the matter. It was not. The affair created a hidden connection between Candy and Betty, even though Betty was not part of the relationship itself. Candy had been inside a secret that directly involved Betty's husband. That meant every later encounter between the two women carried a history that could not be seen simply by looking at them. By June 1980, Candy and Alan had moved on from the affair. Candy continued living her family life, while Alan remained married to Betty. There was no obvious reason to believe that the old relationship would suddenly become the center of a homicide investigation. Then came June 13th. Alan was away from home on a business trip. Betty was at the Gore residence with her children. Candy arrived at the house that day, and the encounter between the two women would become the final meeting of Betty's life. What happened inside the house is known largely through Candy's later statements and the evidence examined during the investigation and trial. There was no surviving eyewitness who could provide an independent account of the confrontation. That absence would become critically important. Candy maintained that Betty confronted her about the affair with Alan. According to Candy, Betty was angry and the conversation became threatening. Candy said Betty picked up an axe and attacked her. From Candy's perspective, the situation had suddenly become a fight for survival. The account presented a complicated psychological picture. Candy was not claiming that she had accidentally caused Betty's death while trying to leave. She acknowledged using the weapon. Her argument was that the violence occurred because she believed she was under attack and needed to defend herself. Yet the physical evidence made the story far more disturbing. Betty had suffered multiple blows from the axe. The violence inside the house was severe enough to leave investigators facing a crime scene that suggested an intense and prolonged confrontation. Every wound raised questions about the sequence of events. What happened first? How long did the struggle last? Was Betty still attacking when the fatal blows were delivered? And at what moment, if any, did the threat against Candy end? Those questions could not be answered simply by identifying the weapon. Investigators also had to examine Candy herself. She had known the victim. She had a connection to Betty's husband. She had been present at the scene, and she had a reason to fear that the secret affair might finally be exposed. To some observers, the affair immediately suggested jealousy or revenge. But the defense would eventually argue that such an assumption was too simple. A previous affair could explain why the two women had something to discuss, but it did not automatically prove that Candy had planned to kill Betty. This distinction would become central. There was another element that made the case particularly difficult: Candy's outward appearance. People who knew her did not necessarily see a violent person. She was a mother, a wife, and a familiar member of the community. The idea that she could enter another woman's home and kill her with an axe seemed almost impossible to reconcile with the person neighbors believed they knew. But criminal cases are not decided by appearances. The investigation moved forward, and the story of the secret relationship began to emerge. What had once been a private matter between Candy and Alan was now relevant to a homicide investigation. Friends and acquaintances were forced to reconsider conversations and relationships they had previously considered harmless. For Betty's family, however, there was no mystery about the loss itself. Betty was gone. Her children were left without their mother, and Alan returned from his trip to a nightmare that had not existed when he left. For Candy, the future became equally uncertain. She faced the possibility of being convicted of killing another woman. Her freedom, reputation, family, and entire identity were suddenly at stake. The case would eventually move into a courtroom, where the question would become sharper than ever. Candy did not simply have to explain why she had been inside Betty's home. She had to persuade 12 jurors that the violence was the result of self-defense rather than murder. Before that decision could be made, prosecutors and defense attorneys would have to reconstruct the most important moments of June 13th, piece by piece. And somewhere inside that reconstruction lay the answer to the central mystery: whether Betty Gore attacked first, whether Candy truly believed her life was in danger, and how a confrontation between two women who had once shared an ordinary community became one of Texas's most controversial murder cases completely. As investigators began reconstructing the events of June 13, 1980, the case became less about what everyone knew and more about what no one could prove. Betty Gore was dead. Candy Montgomery had admitted causing the fatal injuries, and the weapon had been identified. Yet the most important question remained unanswered. What exactly had happened between the two women inside the Gore home? The answer depended heavily on Candy's account, because Betty was no longer alive to describe the confrontation. There was no neutral eyewitness standing between them. There was only the physical evidence, the statements given afterward, and the difficult task of determining whether Candy's version could explain the violence found inside the house. According to Candy, she had gone to see Betty that day for an ordinary reason. Their meeting was not supposed to become violent, but during their conversation, Betty confronted her about the affair with Alan Gore. The subject was deeply personal, and Candy later described Betty as angry and threatening. Candy said Betty then produced an axe. That moment became the dividing line between two possible interpretations of the entire case. In Candy's version, the weapon was introduced by Betty, turning the confrontation into an immediate physical threat. Candy claimed she tried to defend herself, and what followed was a struggle that escalated beyond anything either woman could control. But investigators had to examine whether the evidence supported that sequence. The axe was not merely a symbolic detail. It was the instrument of Betty's death, and the injuries inflicted upon her were extensive. The violence was difficult to understand as a simple exchange of blows. Investigators had to consider the position of the bodies, the physical condition of the scene, the injuries sustained, and the circumstances surrounding the confrontation. The more they examined the evidence, the more complicated the story became. Candy did not present herself as someone who had calmly decided to kill Betty. Instead, she described a psychological reaction to extreme fear. Her defense would eventually emphasize the idea that a person facing a perceived threat does not necessarily behave with the calm precision expected by someone observing the event afterward. Fear can distort judgment. Panic can alter perception, and a struggle can become uncontrollable in seconds. But there was another side to the story. Betty had been attacked repeatedly, and the sheer brutality of the killing made it difficult for some people to accept that the entire event could be explained by self-defense. The prosecution would need to convince jurors that Candy's actions went beyond what was reasonably necessary to protect herself. The distinction was crucial. A person may be legally justified in defending herself from an attack, but the law does not automatically excuse every act of violence committed after that danger begins. The circumstances, the level of force, and the person's state of mind all matter. That meant the trial would eventually focus not simply on whether Betty attacked Candy, but on what Candy believed was happening at each stage of the confrontation. There was also the uncomfortable reality of the affair. Candy had been involved with Betty's husband. Even though the relationship had ended, the fact remained. To prosecutors, that history could provide a possible motive. It created an obvious reason for tension between the two women and gave the state a narrative in which the confrontation had emotional roots. But motive was not the same as proof. Candy's attorneys could argue that the affair explained why Betty was angry, but it did not establish that Candy had entered the house intending to kill her. In fact, Candy's entire defense depended upon the idea that the meeting had not been planned as a murder. The difference between those two narratives was enormous. In one version, Candy was a woman who entered Betty's home and became involved in a deadly confrontation that ended with Betty's murder. In the other, Candy was a woman who found herself trapped in a violent struggle and reacted because she believed she had no other way to survive. Both stories contained the same victim. Both involved the same weapon. Both acknowledged Candy's presence. But they assigned completely different meanings to the violence. As word of the killing spread through Wiley, the private details of the relationships became increasingly difficult to keep private. Friends and acquaintances learned about the affair. People who had known Candy and Betty were forced to reconsider what they thought they understood about both women. The case challenged a comforting assumption about violence, that murder is always committed by someone who appears obviously dangerous. Candy did not fit that image. She was a wife and mother living an apparently ordinary suburban life. She belonged to a community where people knew her. She had children. She had friendships. She attended social activities. There was nothing about her public identity that immediately suggested extreme violence. Betty also belonged to that same ordinary world. That was what made the case so disturbing. The tragedy had not arrived from outside the community. It had developed within it. As investigators prepared the case for court, they had to transform a chaotic and violent encounter into a coherent sequence of events. Every detail mattered. The relationship between Candy and Alan mattered. Betty's confrontation mattered. The presence of the axe mattered. Candy's injuries and statements mattered. The condition of the house mattered. But perhaps the most important evidence was Candy's own explanation of what she believed had happened. She maintained that Betty attacked first. She maintained that she feared for her life. And she maintained that the killing was not the result of a deliberate plan. The prosecution would challenge those claims. The defense would build its entire case around them. Soon, the story would leave the quiet streets of Wiley and move into a courtroom, where Candy Montgomery would sit before a jury and hear the most private and disturbing details of her life examined in public. There, the question would become unavoidable. Was Candy Montgomery a murderer who had escaped punishment by convincing a jury that she had acted in self-defense? Or was she a woman who survived a terrifying confrontation and was judged afterward for violence committed during a moment of overwhelming fear? The answer would depend on 12 people who had never been inside that house on June 13th. They would have to decide what happened during the final moments of Betty Gore's life. And before they could deliver their verdict, they would hear evidence that would make the case even more extraordinary. By the time Candy Montgomery's case reached the courtroom, the killing of Betty Gore had become more than a local tragedy. The story had everything that could capture public attention. A quiet Texas town, 2 families, a secret affair, a brutal death, and a defendant who admitted causing the fatal injuries while insisting that she had acted in self-defense. Every detail of the relationship between Candy, Alan, and Betty was now being examined under the harsh light of a murder trial. The prosecution faced a difficult task. Candy had not simply denied being present. She had acknowledged that she was responsible for Betty's death. The argument therefore centered on her state of mind and the circumstances that led to the violence. Prosecutors needed the jury to reject the idea that Candy had been fighting for her life and instead conclude that the killing constituted murder. The defense took a different approach. Candy's attorneys presented her as a woman who had been placed in an extraordinary and terrifying situation. They emphasized her claim that Betty had confronted her and attacked her with an axe. If the jury believed that account, then the legal meaning of the killing could change completely. At the center of the courtroom battle was the concept of self-defense. The defense did not need to convince everyone that Candy had behaved perfectly. It needed to establish that her actions occurred because she reasonably believed she faced an immediate threat. The question was whether the violence could be understood as a desperate response to danger rather than an intentional killing. That distinction became increasingly important as the evidence was presented. The prosecution pointed toward the severity of Betty's injuries. The number and nature of the wounds created an image of extraordinary violence. To prosecutors, that violence raised questions about whether Candy had continued attacking after any immediate danger had disappeared. If Betty had truly been the aggressor, the jury still had to consider whether Candy's response remained legally justified throughout the encounter. The defense, however, focused attention on the psychological reality of a violent struggle. Human beings do not always react to danger in predictable ways. Fear can overwhelm rational thought, and a person who believes she is about to die may respond with extreme force. Candy's attorneys sought to make the jury understand the confrontation from her perspective, rather than judging every second of it with the clarity available after the fact. The affair between Candy and Alan remained an unavoidable part of the story. It supplied emotional context and gave prosecutors an obvious reason to suggest hostility. Betty had discovered or confronted a deeply personal betrayal, and Candy was the woman connected to it. Yet the defense could argue that the affair was not proof of a murder plan. The relationship had already ended, and there was no simple evidence that Candy had entered Betty's home intending to kill her. As the trial continued, the courtroom became a place where private lives were dissected in public. Candy's marriage was discussed. Alan's relationship with both women was examined. Betty's personality and interactions with Candy became relevant. The ordinary details of community life suddenly carried the weight of evidence. For the people listening, the most unsettling part was how familiar the characters seemed. There was no distant criminal organization and no stranger lurking outside a dark house. These were neighbors and acquaintances who had shared the same social world. The tragedy had emerged from relationships that had once seemed ordinary. Candy herself faced the jury while knowing that the decision would determine the rest of her life. A conviction could send her to prison for years. An acquittal would allow her to leave the courtroom, but it could never erase the death that had occurred inside Betty's home. The defense eventually presented the argument that would define the case. Candy had not gone to the house with a plan to murder Betty. She had gone there for an ordinary purpose. The confrontation had developed unexpectedly. According to Candy, Betty had become physically aggressive, and the presence of the axe transformed the encounter into a struggle for survival. The prosecution challenged this interpretation by emphasizing the brutal outcome. A woman had died after suffering numerous injuries, and the jury had to determine whether those injuries were consistent with a legitimate act of self-defense. That decision required more than emotion. The jurors had to separate their feelings about the affair from the evidence surrounding the killing. They had to consider whether Candy's account was believable and whether the prosecution had proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The courtroom became increasingly focused on a question that sounded simple but was extraordinarily difficult to answer. What was Candy thinking during those final moments? No one could enter her mind. No camera had recorded the confrontation. Betty could not speak. The jury, therefore, had to reconstruct the event from the evidence that remained and from the testimony presented in court. When the case reached its conclusion, the atmosphere surrounding the trial was tense. Everyone understood that the verdict would carry enormous consequences. For Betty's family, there could be no outcome that restored what had been lost. For Candy, however, The verdict would determine whether she would be legally recognized as a murderer or as a woman who had acted in self-defense. The jurors eventually returned with their decision. Candy Montgomery was found not guilty. The verdict stunned many people who had followed the case. Some accepted the conclusion that Candy had acted in self-defense. Others struggled to reconcile the acquittal with the extraordinary brutality of Betty's death. The disagreement would continue long after the courtroom emptied. For Candy, the verdict meant freedom from a murder conviction, but it could not erase what had happened. Betty Gore remained dead. Her family permanently changed, while Candy carried the memory of the confrontation into the rest of her life. The law had reached its conclusion. The public, however, was left with a different question. Had the jury discovered the truth, or had it simply decided that the prosecution could not prove another version beyond a reasonable doubt? That distinction would keep the Candy Montgomery case alive for decades, because the verdict closed the courtroom but never completely closed the mystery.